A tranquil waltz amidst 300 demons, that was the fateful moment that brought down an entire underground empire. The camera focuses on Leo's hands trembling uncontrollably as he is trapped in a storm of emotions until Harper's hand touches them firm and steady. She didn't see a prince of the underworld. She only saw a drowning soul. The tragedy erupts as the mechanical noise of the shipyard pierces the night, where familial bonds are crushed by greed, leaving a new king with a broken heart on his throne of power.
The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel fell into a profound hush, a silence laden with unspoken menace. Before 300 of New York's most lethal mobsters, a young woman named Harper Davis took the hand of Leo Moretti, the 24-year-old autistic son of the city's most feared Don. For years, Leo had been a phantom, an entity invisible to his father's world and an outcast to society. But Harper perceived not a sign of a criminal dynasty, but a man drowning in sensory chaos. In asking him to dance, she had just subverted the underworld's entire brutal hierarchy. The event was the yearly Moretti Foundation Gala, a spectacle of performative charity for the year 2024. Men who governed through extortion, clad in Tom Ford, presented six-figure donations to pediatric hospitals. The room was a shimmering tableau of diamonds, champagne, and concealed firearms. Harper Davis was merely staff stationed near an ice sculpture. At 26, she was not a guest but a paid chaperone for the event firm, tasked with preventing minor mishaps. This undesirable weekend job was the price of her master's degree and a crushing student debt. From her position, Harper observed the entire predatory ecosystem. The alpha, Dominic Moretti, presided near the bar, his demeanor cold and strategic. At his side stood his eldest Matteo, the volatile heir who inherited his father's cruelty but none of his restraint. He laughed too boisterously, drank too quickly, and gripped politicians' hands with threatening force. Yet the figure that truly captured Harper's focus sat alone in the shadows. This was Leo Moretti, 24, strikingly handsome and sharing the sharp jawline of his brother. Yet the familial similarity ceased there. While Matteo absorbed the room's frantic energy, Leo was being crushed by it. He was seated with a rigid posture, his shoulders slumped as if beneath an immense, invisible burden. Though his suit was immaculate, he picked at its cuffs, his fingers in a state of agitated motion. Harper recognized the indicators immediately. Her own younger brothers on the spectrum. She was fluent in the language of sensory overload. Leo wore noise-dampening earplugs, but they were utterly insufficient. The ballroom had become his own personal auditory inferno. A 12-piece jazz ensemble delivered a thunderous Sinatra performance. Hundreds of conversations ricocheted from the ceiling. The chime of glassware, sudden peals of laughter, the dense amalgam of perfume and steak. It was a sensory tidal wave. What disturbed Harper most, however, was his calculated isolation. Leo's table was a void. Captains, city officials, and their spouses simply behaved as if he were not present, their gazes sliding past him. Periodically, someone would murmur behind a hand, casting him a glance of either pity or unadulterated contempt. To avoid offending Dominic, they rendered his younger son non-existent. Matteo, swallowing a scotch, strode past his brother's table without a single look, preoccupied with ingratiating himself with the senator. One could see Leo's distress escalating. His respiration grew shallow, his fidgeting intensified. He began pressing his palms into his thighs, his body swaying almost imperceptibly. His eyes were clamped shut. To an observer, he might seem timid or intoxicated. To Harper, he appeared on the verge of a total implosion. She knew precisely what a public meltdown would signify. The whispers would become overt stares. These hardened criminals would interpret it as a flaw in the Moretti lineage. Matteo would leverage it to consolidate his own power, and Leo would be left utterly humiliated, exposed to the cruel judgment of his father's world. "Harper, check the roast," her boss Madeline commanded, hurrying past. "And for heaven's sake, do not make eye contact with the family." "Wait, Madeline," Harper replied softly. "The younger Moretti is in crisis. The music is too loud. A light above him is flickering. He needs a quiet space now." Madeline froze, her face draining of color. She seized Harper's arm, her nails pressing into her skin. "Have you lost your mind? You do not look at Leo Moretti. You do not speak to him. The Dawn displays him for exactly 1 hour to prove he exists. Then security removes him. Disengage. They will destroy your life, Harper. I am serious." Madeline propelled her toward the buffet and vanished. Harper tried to comply, but her gaze kept returning to Leo's corner. His rocking motion was now more pronounced. He was tapping a frantic, specific rhythm against his temple. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. It was his final, failing strategy to cope. The band's brass section hit a shrill peak. Leo flinched as if struck, knocking his water glass to the floor. The sound was minuscule in the cavernous room, yet heads swiveled instantly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One of Dominic's men, Silas, began to advance, his hand on his earpiece, but he hesitated, uncertain how to manage the Dawn's untouchable son. Leo was motionless, his gaze fixed on the shattered glass. A choked sound escaped him. The panic was consuming him, sealing him within the sensory tempest. Harper acted without considering the repercussions. She didn't think about her employment, Madeline's caution, or the palpable danger of defying these men. She saw only a person at the precipice who needed to be pulled back. She grabbed a fresh napkin from a trolley and walked directly into the heart of the conflict. The brief journey from the buffet to Leo's table was like navigating a minefield. Harper maintained a steady, calm pace, avoiding abrupt movements. As she neared, conversations at adjacent tables ceased. The cold scrutiny of every gangster in his vicinity was on her. She felt the immense weight of their collective gaze, but kept her own eyes on the broken glass. She knelt beside his table, maintaining a respectful distance. She deliberately avoided his face, aware that direct eye contact could feel like a physical assault to someone so overwhelmed. "Allow me to clear this away," Harper said. Her voice was steady and low, devoid of the patronizing tone people often used with him. She addressed him as a peer. With the napkin, she carefully gathered the larger shards of glass. From her periphery, she saw Leo observing her hands, his breathing still ragged. "That brass section is far too aggressive," Harper remarked casually, her gaze still lowered. "And the light in that sconce is flickering at roughly 40 hertz. It's incredibly distracting." Leo's restless fingers went still. He inclined his head slightly in her direction. It had likely never occurred to him that another person would perceive the light. 42 hertz, Leo corrected. His voice, deep and raspy from disuse, was nonetheless exact. A faint smile touched Harper's lips as she finally looked up, directing her gaze to his chin. 42. You have a sharper eye than the hotel maintenance. She rose, the glass contained in the napkin. At that moment, the music shifted to a slow, predictable, and perfectly structured waltz. It was pure mathematics. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. "You're overloaded," Harper said, not as a query, but as a statement of fact. "The sound isn't being processed, it's a solid barrier of noise." Leo gave a sharp nod, his hand still unsteady. "It's an excess of data. I require a single point of focus, Harper continued. A physical anchor to ground the sensory input, a repetitive motion. Her next action was entirely unplanned. Perhaps it was fury at witnessing 300 people watch a man disintegrate. Perhaps it was a sudden, fierce, protective instinct. Harper stepped around the spill and positioned herself directly before him. She offered her hand. "Just count the rhythm with me," she said. "It's 3/4 time. It's pure logic. It will silence everything else." Leo simply gazed at her outstretched hand. For one agonizingly long moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. At the surrounding tables, all conversation had died. Silas, the bodyguard, lurched forward, his face a mask of utter alarm. "Ma'am, step away from him immediately," Silas commanded. Harper paid him no mind. Her hand remained extended, her expression serene. "It's only an invitation, Leo. You can refuse." Leo's gaze shifted from her hand to her face. He found no pity there. He saw no fear. He saw an escape. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out his own hand. "So?" Harper took his hand, and the man's grip was one of pure desperation. She managed to get this immense 6'2" man coiled with tension to his feet. She murmured, "1 foot, then the next, 1, 2, 3. She guided him onto the dance floor in full view, and Leo moved with a heavy reluctance, his eyes fixed on his own feet. Harper instructed, "Feel my hand, ignore the chaos, and count with me." And he complied, echoing 1 and then stepping. 2. The count of 3 signifies a fracture in the hall's rigid social contract. Across the room, Matteo Moretti witnesses this transgression, a psychological short circuit triggered by the sight of his compromised brother being guided by a mere server. This perceived violation manifests as a visible tide of rage, an immediate defense of the family's precarious honor. Then the patriarch, Dominic Moretti, turns his gaze, and the entire social ecosystem instantly crystallizes. The symphony of celebration ceases, leaving only the oblivious orchestra playing against a backdrop of profound tension. With a minute, yet absolute gesture, Dominic stays his enforcers, asserting his role as the ultimate arbiter. Under his watchful eye, on the dance floor, Leo begins a quiet transformation. The knot of systemic terror in his nervous system begins to unwind. The predictable rhythmic structure of the waltz, mediated by Harper's steadying influence, serves as an anchor, drawing him from the maelstrom of his inner world. His gaze lifts, a physical indicator of his psychic reorientation. The tremor that has plagued him all evening subsides. 90 beats per minute, Leo states, his voice possessing a newfound clarity. The perfect rhythm, Harper responds, guiding their rotation. You see, you are a natural. He then reveals a core truth of his existence. People don't really touch me. A statement of fact. They call me damaged. Matteo claims I was born a defect. A muscle works in Harper's jaw, a fleeting sign of the comment's impact. Your brain is not flawed, Leo. It is simply wired for a different purpose, processing concepts they cannot imagine. This act of cognitive reframing catalyzes a breakthrough. He makes direct eye contact. Within his intense, hazel gaze, one can perceive the architecture of a powerful intellect beneath the surface of his anxiety. The music fades into a profound silence as 300 pairs of eyes fixate upon them. Harper releases his hand, stepping back to create a deliberate space. "Is it better?" she asks. Leo inspects his own palm, then the observing crowd. a flicker of lucid awareness dawning without the usual cascade of panic. He offers Harper a small, genuine nod. Better. A single, slow clap suddenly punctuates the stillness. The crowd parts, a human sea yielding to the passage of Dominic Moretti, who advances directly toward them. The ambient temperature of the room seems to plummet. At his shoulder is Matteo, his hands clenched, radiating a palpable threat of violence. The courage Harper possessed moments ago evaporates into a primal, ice-cold fear. She has touched the forbidden son of the city's apex predator. Dominic halts just 2 feet away, his presence an oppressive force, scented with expensive smoke and absolute power. His focus bypasses Leo entirely. His cold, reptilian stare is locked directly onto Harper. "Your name," Dominic's quiet voice demands, each word resonating in the tomb-like silence. "Harper Davis, sir," she replies, struggling to maintain a level tone against the instinct for flight. "I'm with the event staff." Matteo scoffs at his father's side. "A server! This nobody presumed to touch my brother. Dad, remove her. Silas can demonstrate the consequences of crossing our lines." A wave of cold dread washes over Harper. She recognizes the threat's lethal authenticity. In that moment, Leo makes a move. Though the motion is slight, he shifts his body to shield Harper, placing himself between her and his brother. "She was helping Matteo," Leo states. His tone is flat, yet the action itself is an unprecedented act of defiance. Matteo's jaw hangs in disbelief. Leo's passivity has been an immutable law of their family dynamic. A raised hand from Dominic silences Matteo's retort. The Don studies his younger son, noting the calm posture, the stillness where a storm of anxiety usually raged. His eyes then snap back to Harper. "Upstairs, my office, immediately," Dominic commands. He pivots and departs. A mountainous figure named Silas materializes at Harper's elbow, his hand closing around her bicep. "Move," he growls. "My belongings." Harper begins, her composure finally fracturing. "Move," Silas reiterates, his grip a painful certainty. He escorts her from the hall through imposing doors and into a private elevator. He stands beside her, a silent, intimidating monolith, as her mind races. This is the end point. I touched a kingpin. I exposed a flaw in his lineage. I am about to be erased. An image of her small apartment, her unpaid bills, her brother's photograph flashes through her mind. The elevator opens directly into the penthouse, an environment thick with security. Corridors are lined with men in tailored suits. Silas steers her firmly into a vast, dark office where Dominic Moretti is decanting a dark liquor into a crystal glass. No offer is extended to her. He seats himself behind a monumental desk, dismisses Silas, and has the door closed. The sound of the lock engaging is like a gunshot. "Sit," he commands. Harper collapses into a leather chair. He sips his drink, his eyes conducting a lengthy, silent analysis. "My boy Leo," he begins, the words devoid of paternal warmth, "has been seen by the finest doctors from Zurich to Manhattan. They medicate him. They advise me to conceal him. They label him a weakness." Harper finds her voice. "Sir, with all due respect, they diagnose it as an illness. Autism is not a disease. It's a different operating system. Leo requires a tailored environment, a means to translate a world that is screaming at him." A faint reaction registers in Dominic's eyes. "You hold a strong opinion for a server." "My master's degree is in occupational therapy," Harper retorts, her survival instinct taking control. My specialization is sensory integration. This job pays my student loans. Dominic leans back, forming a steeple with his fingers. Fascinating. So tell me, miss. Davis, what was your analysis of tonight? Harper hesitates, recognizing the query as a test. The truth carries immense risk, yet a lie would be instantly transparent. Honesty is the only viable strategy. I saw an individual drowning in a sensory hurricane with no one offering a lifeline, she states plainly. That room was an assault on his nervous system. The strobing lights, the cacophony of horns, his social isolation. It was a formula for overload. The dance offered a predictable pattern. It provided him with an anchor. Dominic remained silent, his gaze shifting past her toward the darkened window. This family is on the verge of a war, Miss Davis. My own strength is waning, he confesses, the admission a grave and dangerous secret. Mateo possesses brute force but lacks tactical finesse. He provokes conflict when alliances are needed. To him, Leo represents a stain on our legacy. Harper's brow furrows. Why are you telling me this? Dominic leans forward, placing his palms flat on the desk. Because a storm is gathering within these very walls. Upon my death, Mateo will assume control. When he does, he will either confine Leo or take permanent measures to erase what he perceives as our family's great shame. Harper gasps. That is monstrous. That is our reality, Dominic answers, his tone like cold steel. I require Leo to be functional, not merely for social events, but for the enterprise, his aptitude for numbers, for strategy. It is a profound gift. He identifies discrepancies in ledgers that my most trusted men overlook. But he cannot articulate his insights. The pressure is too great. The people are too intense. Dominic retrieves a thick envelope from a drawer, tossing it onto the desk where it lands with a thud of finality. I am making you a proposition, he says. Your current employment is terminated. You will now serve as Leo's full-time companion, his guide, his interpreter. The title is yours to choose. You will teach him to navigate this world without shattering. You will be present at every dinner, every meeting, every single function. Harper's gaze is fixed on the envelope. You are asking me to work for you? I am asking you to ensure my son's survival, Dominic clarifies, his voice low and resonant. Inside is a check for $250,000, a signing bonus. Your debts will be cleared. Your weekly compensation is $10,000. You will reside here. And if I refuse? Harper asks, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dominic's expression is unreadable, but a fresh coldness permeates the air. You entered a dangerous world of your own volition, Miss Davis, and you laid hands on my son. You publicly shamed my heir in front of 300 guests. In Mateo's world, you are now a problem requiring a solution, and he invariably solves his problems. The air in Harper's lungs feels thin. This is not a job offer. It is a gilded cage being presented as a sanctuary. Work for me, and you will fall under my protection. Mateo will not even glance in your direction, Dominic offers in a silken tone. But should you leave this room alone, your life will be forfeit before you reach the street. Her eyes fell to the envelope. She pictured Leo's desperate grip, a brilliant mind submerged in chaos. She saw Mateo's homicidal glare. She had trespassed on their territory, and the exit had just vanished. With a trembling hand, Harper draws the envelope across the desk. A chilling, predatory smile forms on Dominic's face. Welcome to the family, Ms. Davis. The Moretti estate in Oyster Bay was less a residence than a fortress disguised as a mansion. Gates of wrought iron, 12 feet in height, stood sentinel, their stone pillars concealing scanners capable of reading one's biometrics. Beyond them lay 40 acres of manicured lawn, a private dock on the cold Atlantic, and a manor of limestone and ballistic glass. For 3 weeks, Harper Davis existed as a phantom within this golden prison. Her reality was now a luxury suite, a bank account she dared not touch, and a singular objective: to recalibrate the mind of a mob boss's neglected son. Consequently, Harper's first strategic move was to deconstruct Leo's environment. Dominic granted her complete authority over his youngest son's domain, an act which earned her the silent, simmering resentment of the entire household staff. Harper began by systematically disarming the sensory triggers in Leo's private office. The humming fluorescent fixtures were replaced with smart lighting that offered a warm, adjustable ambiance. She installed heavy velvet curtains to mitigate the harsh morning light and the intrusive noise from the family helicopter. Crucially, she imposed a strict, predictable schedule. For a cognitive framework like Leo's, chaos was a toxin. Routine was the only viable antidote. At precisely 2 post-meridium on a Tuesday, Harper entered the controlled environment she had meticulously designed. Within the study, a soft, amber light permeated a space scented with cedar wood. There, at an immense mahogany desk, Leo was immersed in leather-bound volumes and the glow of twin monitors. He offered no acknowledgement, yet a minute release of tension in his shoulders, a detail imperceptible to most, registered to Harper as a seismic shift. He was beginning to internalize her presence. "A baseline reading?" she prompted softly, settling into an armchair opposite him. Leo placed 2 fingers on his wrist to find the pulse. 72 beats per minute. Nominal. A faint smirk touched Harper's lips. "Good." From her bag, she produced a heavy, slate-gray blanket. "I've brought a new variable, a weighted blanket containing 20 pounds of fine glass beads. During periods of systemic overload, the constant pressure provides proprioceptive input to the brain. It reestablishes the connection between mind and body, thereby mitigating stress." Leo ceased his work, his gaze fixed on the object. A flicker of surprise crossed his features, but he was a man who deferred to cold, hard data, and Harper's methods were always empirically sound. "So, the pressure simulates a physical anchor for my nervous system?" "Precisely," she confirmed, placing it on a corner of his desk. "Deploy it when the data stream becomes a vortex." Leo's gaze met hers, his typically agitated hazel eyes now possessing a startling, laser-like focus. "The data is always a vortex, Harper, but it is also propagating a fiction." A line formed on her brow as she leaned in. What fiction? He turned a monitor toward her, displaying a dizzying matrix of code and logistics for the Port of Newark, a central artery in the Moretti Syndicate. "My father believes this clerical work renders me inert," Leo began, his speech accelerating into a detached, rapid analysis. "But numbers possess their own syntax. They adhere to logic, and this logic is being violated." His slender finger traced a single column. "Cargo weights for the Rotterdam shipments over the last 14 months. The manifests declare 30 tons of olive oil and textiles per container. However, fuel consumption logs for the departing trucks, which I extracted from our internal network, indicate they are hauling loads closer to 40 tons. A chilling wave of understanding washed over Harper. They are transporting something with far greater density. "Ordnance," Leo stated, his voice devoid of emotion. or pure narcotics, but that is not the central anomaly. My father suspended all weapons trafficking 6 months ago as a gesture of goodwill to federal authorities. The true issue is the revenue stream. With several keystrokes, he accessed a secured file. The ledgers reflect profit from only 30 tons of legitimate goods. The surplus 10 tons of illicit, high-yield product is simply erased from the financial record. The funds never approach my father's primary accounts. Someone is running a shadow operation, Harper whispered as the horrific architecture of the scheme materialized. Someone is leveraging his infrastructure to run a private enterprise and is siphoning off 100% of the profit. $32.4 million over 14 months, Leo clarified. Who is your father's chief officer at the Newark port? Leo's eyes finally rose from the data. His expression was a mask of neutrality, but his fingers drummed a frantic, silent rhythm against his leg. Mateo. The name hung in the air, and Harper felt her own heart pause. Mateo was not merely a subordinate. He was betraying his own patriarch. In their world, it was the one transgression that demanded a fatal price, even for a son. Should Mateo discover that his supposedly deficient brother could decrypt his covert enterprise, Leo's life would be forfeit. Your father aware? Harper's voice was unsteady. No, Leo countered instantly. Mateo is the heir. I am the anomaly. Without irrefutable physical proof presented to his capos, Mateo will simply dismiss me as mentally unstable. My father will align with his powerful son, not his fractured one. In that moment, Harper saw him not as fractured, but as a brilliant mind navigating a sea of predators, utterly defenseless against their machinations. All right, Harper said, rising from her chair. She moved behind him and draped the heavy blanket across his shoulders. He stiffened for a moment, but as the 20 pounds of deep pressure enveloped him, a breath he seemed to have held for years escaped his lips. We will not inform your father. Not yet, Harper declared, her tone hardening to steel. First, we acquire the proof. We construct an unassailable case. 2 weeks later, the delicate truce they had brokered with the world was obliterated. Dominic Moretti collapsed in his study, clutching his chest. The cardiac event was minor, yet it sent a tremor through the foundations of the entire criminal underworld. The infallible dawn was mortal, and the predators began to circle. An old adversary, Declan Hayes, the formidable Irishman who controlled the Boston ports, sensed the vulnerability and demanded a meeting. Hayes was alleging that the Morettis had cheated him in a significant joint venture routed through Newark. Mateo, now serving as the family's acting head, immediately deflected the accusation back onto Hayes's organization, escalating tensions toward open conflict. Yet Dominic, from his recovery bed, forbade Mateo from acting alone. He commanded a summit on neutral territory and, to the astonishment of all, decreed that Leo must attend. He will audit their ledgers during the negotiations. Dominic rasped through an oxygen mask, his eyes locked on a simmering Mateo. If Hayes is fabricating this, Leo will expose the numerical error. He is to be present. And so Harper found herself in the rear of an armored Cadillac, speeding toward a dilapidated meat-packing facility in the Bronx. Beside her, Leo sat perfectly erect in a tailored black suit, a low-frequency current of anxiety emanating from him. Their destination promised a full-scale assault on the senses. Leo, focus on me, Harper said gently, drawing his attention from the kaleidoscopic lights beyond the tinted glass. He turned. He wore the discreet, custom-molded earplugs she had provided, designed to dampen disruptive sounds while preserving the frequency of human speech. "Let us review the protocol," she said, taking his hand. It was no longer a question. Physical contact had become their fundamental line of defense. When the internal sensory volume becomes overwhelming, what is your signal? 2 compressions, Leo answered, his voice tight. Index finger against the thumb. You will move to my position. You will apply firm, steady pressure to my left shoulder. And if Hayes becomes aggressive vocally, I will analyze the rhythmic pattern of his speech, disregarding its volume, Leo recited. I will count his vowel sounds. Excellent, Harper affirmed, her grip on his hand tightening. You will not fracture, Leo? You comprehend these numbers in a way they cannot imagine. They are engaged in a rudimentary contest. You are operating on a plane of existence they are not even aware of. The Escalade glided into the vast, deserted loading bay. The air was frigid, thick with the smell of rust solvents and old blood. A discordant hum emanated from the overhead sodium lamps. Harper felt Leo recoil, his eyes squeezing shut against the harsh illumination. Stay present, Harper murmured, placing her hand firmly on the small of his back as they emerged. Silas and 4 other armed Moretti enforcers created a protective formation around them. Matteo strode ahead, his entire posture a study in arrogant belligerence. They were escorted into a cavernous, reverberating cold room where a long steel table awaited. At the far end sat Declan Hayes, flanked by men who appeared sculpted from pure malice. Hayes was a titan of a man with a wild beard and chillingly vacant eyes. Matteo, his voice ricocheted off the steel surfaces like a gunshot. Where's the patriarch? Has he sent his pups to conduct a man's affairs? My father is occupied, Matteo retorted, claiming a seat at the table's opposite end. I speak for the family now, and I am telling you that you Gaelic mutts owe us 12 million for the stolen shipment. That is a fabrication, Hayes thundered, his massive fist crashing down on the steel. The impact was a deafening detonation. Leo flinched violently, a strangled sound escaping him as he began to rock. Positioned behind his chair, Harper instantly applied an intense, grounding pressure to his shoulders. Breathe, she commanded, tapping his collarbone twice. Matteo cast a look of utter contempt over his shoulder. Either silence that defective instrument, or remove him from my sight. Harper ignored him entirely, leaning close to speak directly into Leo's ear. The numbers, Leo. Focus only on the documents. Hayes slid a thick sheaf of manifests down the length of the table. Here are the dock receipts, Matteo, stamped and verified. Your people loaded the containers. If the cargo vanished, it was your own soldiers who enriched themselves. Matteo seized the documents, his eyes gliding over them uncomprehendingly. He was a man of violence, not of ledgers. These are forgeries, Matteo gambled. They are precise. A quiet, incisive voice pierced the tense atmosphere. In that immense chamber, every head swiveled toward Leo. His rocking had ceased. His entire focus was fixed upon papers, upside down from his vantage point across the table. A deep flush crept up Matteo's neck. Be silent, Leo. Allow the boy to speak, Hayes countered, his expression shifting to one of sharp, predatory interest. Leo was oblivious to them both. He saw only the data. The data was a system. The data was truth. The receipts are accurate, but solely for the declared cargo, Leo announced, his voice gaining a solid, accelerating cadence. The vessel Oceanic Star, Pier 44, Tuesday the 12th. 300 units of machinery, but the corresponding weight displacement represents a mathematical impossibility. And in an instant, the room's chaotic energy vanishes as Leo rises to his feet. He moves toward the table, a silent predator, and takes the documents from a thunderstruck Matteo. Here, the true nature of his intellect is revealed. Examine page 4, the fuel manifests, Leo states, his finger tracing columns with uncanny speed. The vehicles were provisioned for 40 tons each, not the reported 30. The garage logs, which I audit weekly, confirm a suspension compression consistent with precisely 42 tons. Leo then fixes his gaze upon Declan Hayes, a judge delivering a verdict. Your consignment never reached you, Mr. Hayes, because it was diverted before it ever left our territory. Diverted to where? Hayes probes, his skepticism now fully replaced by intrigue. Warehouse 7 in Red Hook, Leo answers without a moment's hesitation. The property is leased to a shell corporation, Vanguard Logistics, which, following the decryption of certain offshore records yesterday, is wholly owned by Matteo Moretti. An oppressive silence descends, so profound the hum of the overhead lights becomes a roar. In a primal explosion of fury, Matteo lunges across the table, screaming, "You deceitful, broken fraud!" Yet before his hands can find their target, Silas materializes, a weapon aimed squarely at Matteo's chest. The Irish respond in kind. The room holds its breath on the precipice of a massacre. "Stand down!" Hayes commands, his voice a thunderclap as he rises. His gaze shifts between Matteo and Leo, the grim calculus completing itself in his mind. A man like Hayes, a veteran of countless betrayals, recognizes the unvarnished ring of truth. "It seems, Matteo, you've been siphoning from your own kin and attempted to ignite a war with my organization to conceal your treachery." Matteo stands panting, his eyes darting around the room as he comprehends the intricate design of the trap that has just sprung. He had catastrophically misjudged the brother he had long dismissed as a damaged liability. "This discussion is concluded," Hayes announces, gesturing for his men to stand down. "Control your vermin, Moretti. If Dominic cannot cleanse his own house, I will." With that, Hayes and his entourage depart, leaving the Moretti family to fracture in their wake. Matteo fixes Leo with a look of such pure venom it seems to poison the air. Harper breathes. "You just authored your own execution, little brother," Matteo seethes, shoving past Silas and storming out of the warehouse. Harper moves to Leo's side, her hand finding his arm. The shock wave of adrenaline recedes, leaving him trembling uncontrollably. "You succeeded, Leo," she murmurs. "That was masterful." But her eyes remain on the dark doorway through which Matteo disappeared, understanding that the opening gambit had just been played in a much deadlier war. The consequences were swift, but not in the way Harper had hoped. At the estate, confronted with the evidence, Dominic is shattered, but in an act of paternal weakness, he sentences his firstborn to house arrest, merely disarming his men pending confirmation of the fraud. It was a profoundly flawed judgment. Dominic was acting as a father, whereas Matteo was now operating as a caged beast. 3 nights later, a monstrous storm assails the coast, lashing the compound with torrential rain and gale-force winds. The power grid sputters and fails, plunging the estate into blackness before the backup generators ignite with a roar. Harper is in her quarters when the first gunshot pierces the howl of the storm. The sound is distorted by the weather, yet its meaning is absolute. She is out of bed in an instant, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Instinct seizes control. She runs down the darkened corridor toward the east wing, her bare feet slapping against the chillingly cold marble. Mateo had made his play, successfully turning nearly half of the estate's security forces. It was a full-blown insurrection. She storms into Leo's study to find it empty. She checks his bedroom. He is gone. A deep, freezing terror begins to envelop her. "Leo!" she yells, her voice fighting against the storm's assault on the windows. She locates him in the sensory deprivation chamber in the cellar, but his sanctuary had been transformed into a weapon. The adjacent backup power system was sabotaged. Sound-dampening panels were torn from the walls. The generator emitted a high-frequency, metallic shriek that felt like a physical intrusion into the skull. And strobe lights, placed with meticulous cruelty, flashed erratically in the gloom. It was a sensory assault, weaponized and precise. Mateo was not simply attempting to kill Leo, he was attempting to first dismantle his mind. Leo is coiled in a corner, his hands clamped over his ears, eyes sealed shut. He is hyperventilating, emitting a low, continuous wail of pure distress. He is lost in profound autistic shutdown, utterly exposed to this sensory hellscape. "Leo!" Harper shouts, throwing herself into the room. She uses her own body as a shield, covering him. "I am here. I have you." But her words are lost in the mechanical scream. He begins to thrash, too consumed by terror to recognize her attempt to help. A flailing arm connects squarely with Harper's jaw, and a burst of light explodes behind her eyes, but she holds on. She understood that words were useless. She had to sever the sensory input. Harper grabs the heavy, weighted blanket from the floor and drapes it over both of them, forging a makeshift refuge in the corner. The dense fabric immediately extinguishes the blinding flashes and dampens the agonizing shriek. Beneath the blanket's profound pressure, the air grows thick and warm, but it is a space of safety. Harper encircles Leo's chest with her arms, pressing his back to hers and interlocking their legs. She applies firm, unwavering pressure. "Follow my breathing," she commands, her mouth positioned by his neck. She performs an exaggerated pattern of respiration, offering his panicked system a rhythm to latch onto. Inhale, exhale. I am your anchor, Leo. Focus on me. For 10 torturous minutes, the storm raged. The generator shrieked and weapons discharged overhead. But within the confines of the blanket, their universe was reduced to only each other. Gradually, the violent tremors began to subside. Leo's rigid muscles started to yield. The wailing ceased, replaced by deep, shuddering gasps. He leaned into her, his body finally surrendering its fight. "Harper," he managed to say, his voice ragged. "I am right here," she whispered, her own tears mingling with the sweat on his skin. "I am not leaving." In the absolute blackness of their small fortress, Leo did something unprecedented. He raised a trembling hand and sought her face. He did not recoil from the touch. His thumb brushed gently against the place on her jaw where he had struck her. A silent, poignant apology. "You remained," Leo breathed, the words heavy with a lifetime of abandonment. "Everyone leaves. You remained in the dark." I will always remain in the dark with you, Leo, Harper vowed, her heart aching for the man labeled a monster and soaring for the brilliant damaged soul who clung to her as if she were his final point of light. The entire dynamic between them had undergone a fundamental shift. The boundary separating therapist from patient, handler from syndicate prince, had dissolved in the intensity beneath that blanket. This was something far deeper than mere survival. It was a raw, undeniable connection. Abruptly, the generator's screams ceased. The strobe lights went dark. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. The door was forced open. Harper tensed, tightening her hold on Leo, bracing for a fatal shot. The blanket was ripped away. Silas stood before them, drenched in blood, a rifle in his hands. He surveyed the scene, his expression stern but now tinged with a newfound respect. "The insurrection has failed," Silas stated, his breath coming in ragged bursts. "Dominic's loyalists repelled them. Matteo has escaped by boat." Silas extended a hand to Leo. "Your father is secure, but he is weakening, Leo. With Matteo a renegade, the family requires a new leader." Leo's eyes flickered to Silas's hand, then met Harper's. The terror in his gaze was gone, supplanted by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. The internal tempest had passed, leaving in its wake the pure, calculating intellect that understood the mechanics of power more than anyone. Leo disregarded the offered hand. He rose under his own power, bringing Harper up with him. He kept her hand firmly clasped in his. "Then there is business to address," Leo declared, his voice devoid of emotion. "Bring me to my father." The transfer of power in the Moretti family did not conclude with gunfire. It concluded with the spreadsheet. Dominic Moretti was discreetly relocated to a highly secure hospital wing. His heart was failing, a decline accelerated by the poison of his son's betrayal. The criminal underworld held its breath, anticipating the empire's collapse. The other New York families prepared for a war over the resulting territory. They assumed the broken younger brother would be consumed by his own men. They were unprepared for the architecture of Leo's mind. On a Thursday evening, Leo convened the 6 most senior captains in the boardroom on the 42nd floor of a midtown skyscraper. Harper stood near the expansive windows, observing the glittering expanse of the city. She wore a tailored navy suit, her new authority in the room an unspoken reality. She was no longer just the handler. She was the sentinel guarding the new king's gate. Leo commanded the head of the table. He wore noise-canceling earplugs, yet his posture was impeccable. He was a portrait of perfect stillness. He did not need to raise his voice. Leo then activates an intricate live map of the East Coast, overlaid with a web of financial data. He begins to speak, his tone unusually measured for such a gathering. "My brother Matteo believed fear was our primary asset. He was fundamentally mistaken. Information is our primary asset." Vincent Romano, a captain of the old school from Astoria, scoffs audibly and leans back in his chair. "With all due respect, Leo, spreadsheets do not incapacitate our enemies. Matteo is actively recruiting. The Genovese family is already testing our borders in Queens. We require a physical presence, not an academic exercise." Leo's intense, unblinking gaze fixes upon Vincent. He presses a single key. The display shifts, revealing Vincent's entire money laundering operation through a network of laundromats, detailed down to his Swiss account numbers. The blood drains from Vincent's face. The room falls into a state of absolute silence. Your shadow ledger was misaligned by 3% last year, Vincent, Leo observes, his voice utterly casual, carrying no hint of menace. You have been embezzling approximately $400,000 annually for your mistress's condominium in Boca Raton. In the old paradigm, Mateo's answer would be to have Silas execute you, but a corpse generates no revenue, and replacing your network would cost the family precisely $1.2 million. Vincent swallows hard, his hands betraying a violent tremor on the tabletop. Leo, the family will be repaid with an added 10% tax for your foolishness, Leo interjects, his voice a blade of polished steel. And you will reconstruct your fronts using the blockchain protocol I just transmitted to your encrypted phone. This will increase your laundering capacity by 14%, which will settle your debt. Leo's gaze then performed a silent, chilling audit of every man in the room. I am indifferent to your pride. I am indifferent to your territorial squabbles. I am concerned only with the systematic profit. Anyone who disrupts the systems I construct will not be eliminated in the traditional sense. They will be methodically erased from the financial world. I will lock your accounts, inform the IRS of your offshore holdings, and place an anonymous call to Agent Thomas Kessler of the FBI. You will expire in a federal prison, utterly destitute. It was an execution devoid of blood, and it was profoundly unnerving. Harper witnessed the captains physically diminish in their seats. Leo had circumvented their brute strength and attacked them where they were most vulnerable, their modern ledgers. He had just converted the mob into a lethal, hyper-efficient corporation. Following this demonstration, the crew exited in a state of disoriented awe. Their allegiance was not won through respect. It was secured by the chilling realization that Leo Moretti was a system they could not possibly defeat. The moment the heavy doors sealed, the immense pressure lifted from Leo's frame. He slumped forward, his hands clutching the table as if for ballast. The city's hum from 40 stories below seemed to seep through the glass. Harper was at his side instantly. She did not offer a blanket. She became his anchor, her hands pressing firmly on his shoulders, grounding him in the present. 72 beats per minute, she murmured, her cheek close to his temple. You maintained control, Leo. They are utterly petrified of you. Leo squeezed his eyes shut, yielding to her grounding presence. The sensory assault was overwhelming. Vincent's fragrance, the projector's low drone, the almost imperceptible flutter of their heart rates. They carried the stench of cheap tobacco and raw fear. But you navigated it, Harper whispered, her fingers working the tension from his neck. Leo angled his head just enough to capture her hand with his thumb stroking her knuckles. I navigated it because you were in my line of sight. You were the sole stable variable in that entire equation, Harper. When the input becomes chaotic, I locate your pulse. I track your respiration. Harper's own breath caught in her throat. The professional boundary they had so carefully maintained had become completely permeable. She looked directly into his eyes, witnessing the unshielded, vulnerable man he concealed from the world. I'm more than just your anchor now, aren't I? She inquired, her voice soft. Leo rose, drawing her up with a gentle strength. Despite his large stature, he telegraphed every motion so as not to startle her. You ceased being just an anchor the moment you asked me to dance, Harper. You're the only one who ever looked at a broken system and perceived a human being. He held her face, his large hands feeling impossibly gentle for a man who despised physical contact. That gesture alone was a monumental act of trust. When he lowered his head to kiss her, it lacked any shyness or hesitation. It was definitive, born of desperation, and incredibly potent. It was a man finally achieving a clear signal through a lifetime of static. Harper encircled his neck with her arms, returning the kiss, feeling his solid, reassuring presence. In a reality founded on violence and deceit, this was the only element that felt authentic. Their pocket of tranquility persisted for precisely 2 months. Leo had fortified the family's finances, tripling their legitimate income by transitioning from street-level crime to corporate espionage and real estate. Yet Matteo remained a specter, haunting the periphery of their new empire, burning through capital and stewing in his own corrosive resentment. The breakthrough emerged from a detail so minuscule, only a mind like Leo's could have possibly detected it. They were relaxing in the compound's library. Rain beat against the windows, a somber echo of the night Matteo attempted to murder them. Leo was reviewing encrypted medical invoices for his father's VIP care when his hand suddenly froze above the keyboard. "Harper," Leo stated, his voice turning flat and menacing. She approached, carrying 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "What is it?" "My father's private trust. The one he supposedly transferred to me without conditions." Leo indicated a microscopic routing anomaly on the display. There is a latent auto command embedded in the source code. Every Thursday, without fail, it transfers exactly $25,000 to a shell company in Delaware. Harper's brow furrowed. "Who controls the company?" "I just completed a reverse trace on the IP address of the user who accesses the account. It originates from a router in a dilapidated sector of the Brooklyn Navy Yard." Leo looked up, a muscle flexing in his tightly clenched jaw. "My father is financing Matteo's sabbatical. He is funding the assassins Matteo is dispatching to kill me." A wave of profound, icy nausea washed over Harper. Dominic had chosen his violent, treacherous firstborn over the son who had salvaged everything. "Leo, I am so sorry, do not be. It is simply another variable." "It means my last moral impediment has been removed," Leo retorted, but Harper noticed the slight tremor in his hands. The betrayal was a cold blade, even as his analytical mind attempted to categorize it as a mere strategic error. "We dispatched Silas's team to the Navy Yard," Harper said decisively. "No," Leo countered, rising to his feet. "Matteo anticipates Silas's methods. That entire area is a trap. He wants to provoke a firefight." He gazed out the window at the sprawling metropolis. "He will leverage the ensuing chaos to vanish while our men are cut down. Matteo is a brute, but he understands the way my mind functions. He knows a decaying, high-stimulus environment like that shipyard is my vulnerability. He chose it to be my cage." "Then you are not going, and that is final," Harper declared, her tone unyielding. "I must," Leo replied, turning to her. "If I fail to excise this cancer personally, the captains will forever question if their unconventional boss possesses the capacity for brutality. I must break him, but not with firearms." For the subsequent 12 hours, Leo went offline, composing an intricate symphony of pure code. He abstained from sleep. The water Harper provided went largely untouched. He was constructing a digital prison. At 2 a.m., an armored vehicle approached the perimeter of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Colossal, rusted cranes stood like skeletal sentinels against the luminous, polluted skyline. The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of saltwater, decay, and industrial effluent. Inside, Leo was insulated. noise-canceling plugs secured in his ears, a custom Kevlar vest concealed beneath his tailored coat. Harper was beside him, having refused to remain behind. "Mainframe access in 4 minutes," Leo announced, glancing at his sleek, black timepiece. "Silas has the entire vicinity secured with snipers," Harper affirmed, her hand a steadying force on his knee. "If Mateo makes a single hostile move, it is concluded." They exited the SUV and entered the cavernous interior of Warehouse 4. The sensory attack was instantaneous. Wind shrieked through fractured skylights, a discordant orchestra of rattling metal and dripping water. Leo's breath caught, his entire body tensing in response. Harper moved close, her shoulder pressing into his arm, serving as his human gyroscope. "Mirror my steps," she whispered. "Left, right, left." They proceeded to the center of the vast, dimly lit space. "Well, well, well," a voice resonated from a steel catwalk high above. Mateo emerged from the darkness, flanked by 4 armed men. He was disheveled, his expensive suit creased, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "I never believed you had the courage to come here, Leo," Mateo mocked, his voice echoing off the metallic surfaces. "Is it too loud for your delicate senses? Are the frightening noises disturbing you?" Leo's focus was fixed on the tablet in his hands, not the madman above. "Mateo, you have 60 seconds to order your men to lower their weapons and surrender to Silas," Leo stated, his tone perfectly modulated. Mateo released a harsh, grating laugh. "Have you lost your mind? I hold the high ground. I have the firepower. Father may have left you the fortune, but in this world, strength is the only currency that matters. Target the girl. Let's observe how my brother reacts to that." The mercenaries leveled their rifles directly at Harper. Her heart seized as she braced for the bullet. Leo showed no reaction, his finger poised over the tablet's screen. Abruptly, the massive bay doors slammed shut, the impact reverberating like a thunderclap as Leo's script sealed the exits. In that same instant, the lights extinguished, plunging the warehouse into near total darkness, save for a few emergency signs. "What have you done?" Mateo shrieked, his voice laced with pure panic. "Illuminate them!" But his gunmen were effectively blind. Before their night vision could compensate, Leo tapped the screen once more. Immediately, every piece of machinery in the shipyard roared to life in a deafening sonic blast. Metal shrieked against metal. Hydraulics screamed. The entire structure vibrated. On the walkway, the gunmen collapsed, clutching their heads as a feedback loop Leo had coded turned the PA system into a non-lethal weapon. He had constructed a cage of pure, weaponized sound. On the floor below, Leo remained calm. The agonizing frequency was perfectly negated by his and Harper's earpieces, reducing the sonic onslaught to a gentle hum. He looked up at Mateo, who was now on his knees, screaming in agony, his weapon discarded to cover his ears. Leo had weaponized sensory hell itself, forcing his brother to experience a fraction of his own reality. Silas's team then entered, equipped with the noise-dampening gear. They neutralized the incapacitated gunmen with cold efficiency, securing and removing them from the scene. With a final, deliberate keystroke, Leo imposes his will. The industrial clamor ceases, the electronics fall mute, and the resulting vacuum is more oppressive than the sound it replaced. On the floor, Mateo struggles for air, the pressure having ruptured vessels in his nose. Silas drags him down the staircase, depositing him before Leo like a sacrificial offering. In Mateo's eyes, a primal fear has supplanted all bravado. He now understands he confronts not a sibling, but a paradigm he cannot comprehend. "Leo," he rasps, "family, don't." But Leo gazes upon the architect of his childhood torment with complete chilling detachment. There is only the sterile satisfaction of a variable neutralized. "You represent an unacceptable risk in an equation that demands precision." Leo's voice resonates in the cavernous room. "You are impulsive, brutal, and you targeted the single constant that anchors my world." Retreating a step, he finds Harper's hand. "Silas," Leo instructs, his focus locked on Mateo, "escort him to the shipyard. He has a non-negotiable passage on a vessel bound for the West African oil fields. The ship's master expects him to earn his keep. Should he ever return, a bounty has already been placed with local enforcers." "No, Leo, I beg you," Mateo screams, struggling fruitlessly. "End it here, not there." "Termination would be a mercy," Leo counters, his tone devoid of warmth. "Instead, you will survive and comprehend the sensation of utter irrelevance in a system beyond your influence." As Silas removes the shattered figure, Harper exhales, her composure frayed. Leo's strategy was a masterstroke, a rebellion quelled without a single act of violence. Turning to her, the calculating strategist dissolves, revealing the man who depends on her to silence the chaos of his own mind. He removes his auditory filters, flinching as the unfiltered sound of the downpour assaults him. "All rogue variables have been neutralized," he reports, his respiration labored. "The anomaly is corrected." "It is," Harper affirms, closing the distance to provide the grounding pressure of her embrace. "My father's prognosis is less than 7 days," Leo states, his head resting upon hers. "His cardiac system is collapsing. Upon his death, the entire infrastructure becomes my responsibility." "Stee, are you prepared for such a burden?" she queries, meeting his unwavering gaze. "A billion-dollar operation is merely an exercise in logic, but humanity is a code I cannot crack without you, Harper. I cannot govern a board of predators if you are not my axis." From his pocket, he produces a small, velvet case. He forgoes kneeling, aware she finds the ritual meaningless. He simply presents its contents, a flawless emerald-cut diamond of breathtaking geometric purity. "I was not engineered for conventional courtship," Leo admits with raw sincerity. "I cannot offer you normalcy. The projections indicate significant turmoil, but I can offer you unwavering allegiance. You are the sole anomaly I will never seek to regulate. Partner with me, Harper. Administer this reality by my side." Her gaze shifts from the gem to his eyes, recalling the terrified child drowning in sensory overload. Then she beholds the sovereign he has become, a man who bent reality to his own internal logic. A smile pierces her tears as her hand covers his. "I am your constant, Leo," she murmurs. "Present the ring. It's time to return home." Leo Moretti's ascension marked a fundamental paradigm shift in the annals of organized crime. Overt violence was recontextualized not as a show of force, but as evidence of flawed strategy. Guided by Leo's sterile logic and insulated by Harper's protection, the syndicate evolved into an invisible, systemic force. His lieutenants began discussing fiscal projections and data security, rather than homicides and intimidation. The garish theatrics of the Dominic era vanished, supplanted by the lethal efficiency of a corporate war room. Harper Davis had not merely domesticated a predator, she had installed herself as the regent of his silent dominion. She became the conduit through which his brilliant, sequestered intellect was finally made manifest. Their union was a testament to a new doctrine of power, one that does not proclaim, but rather computes, evolves, and safeguards its core components from the shadows. The tormented phantom of the Moretti dynasty had at last discovered his equilibrium, and in doing so composed a new rhythm to which the entire world would be compelled to move.